one of our community members came in to City Hall just now. So. Well, it's 2:30 and we're all here, so let's get going. Who's going to lead the discussion on the broadband fiber master plan?
I will be, Mayor. Good evening, everyone. Let me share my screen here. Okay. Today we wanted to make a study session presentation to you to discuss broadband and fiber master planning, and an item that's later on your agenda today. We wanted to go back a little bit. The City Council actually identified a preparation of a master plan back in 2019, and that was reiterated again in 2022. There's a number of reasons, primarily our response to COVID pandemic, on why we didn't do that master plan in the past. With additional guidance that was provided this year, we are looking to develop that master plan and assess how best to connect into fiber and broadband services for the city of Palm Desert. Since adoption of this goal in February, we have looked at various federal, state, and regional resources, primarily working with CVAG, and we've also looked at other alternatives for broadband and fiber service. So to date, we participated in a number of state sessions, primarily with the Public Utilities Commission, and most recently participated in a workshop that they have a grant for. It's the Local Agency Technical Assistance Grant, that's LATA, and we've been looking at that as a potential funding source for a master plan. We've also engaged with the Coachella Valley Association of Governments. We've really tried to partner with them and take a more regional approach for broadband, seeing that they're doing projects like CV Sync, where they're actually running conduit throughout the Coachella Valley, possibly using that for additional fiber services. We've also taken a look at other Valley cities, Rancho Mirage, which completed fiber master plan, and Indio, which recently adopted one earlier this year. And at least for Rancho Mirage, what we've heard from them is that the existing services that are out there with Spectrum and others seem to be sufficient for their residents and businesses, and there really hasn't been a demand to bring in additional fiber or that speed of internet for their city. Staff also took a trip out to Ontario, California, just up Interstate 10. We met with their staff. The City of Ontario actually has an enterprise where they have installed and run and manage their own fiber network for the city. And we've also met with private infrastructure, particularly not only Spectrum, but Sci-Fi Networks, which recently signed an agreement with Cathedral City to provide private infrastructure through that city. So kind of looking at it from a very high level perspective, the state of California is looking at taking in that bottom left corner, that backbone network, which is currently in Los Angeles, and developing a middle mile network, which takes it from these urban areas and spreads it out to different regions. And the Coachella Valley Association of Governments recently received funding from the state to build out that missing mile in the Coachella Valley. And that missing mile, or middle mile, excuse me, primarily runs along the Interstate 10 corridor, but they're also looking to expand it to the county line at Imperial, and expand it up to Desert Hot Springs, and then possibly down Highway 111. So I mentioned CVAG that we've been working with. They've been awarded that middle mile funding, and they're looking at additional routes for that broadband network. They're also applying for that LATA grant with the CPUC, and it's really meant to complement some of the existing work that Rancho Mirage, maybe Cathedral City, Indio, and possibly Palm Desert are doing for our last mile, where we actually connect residents and businesses into this middle mile. Some of the outstanding questions that still remain, however, there is no service provider identified that would actually come in and provide that broadband service. We likely have to enter into agreements for who maintains these lines across the Coachella Valley, what that cost is associated with it. There's also issues around the timing for when that might get built out, the agreements that I just mentioned, and also the funding source to actually build out that network. So this is a slide provided by CVAG. That green line basically shows you that middle mile that would run along Interstate 10's corridor. They're also looking to expand it into more of a loop where they bring it down Highway 111. And again, they extend it out to the county line at Imperial. Some of the other lines that you see, particularly the purple and yellow, are really kind of that last mile areas that they think you would tee off of their middle mile program and then run it down your major corridors. So from the city of Palm Desert, it's showing it along Monterey, Cook, Washington, and Country Club as a means to provide that service into the neighborhoods and into the businesses. I mentioned we talked with existing utilities. We met with Spectrum. They are expanding their network and offerings throughout the Coachella Valley. They haven't been exactly clear where they're prioritizing, where those lines go first. And we're unsure of what kind of speeds they're actually providing. But we're not aware of any ongoing issues with the internet speed here in the city. I mentioned we also met with Sci-Fi Networks. They have a Fiber City plan. This is a privately funded private infrastructure that they're using throughout the United States, and they're expanding quite a bit actually now in Texas and in California. In California, I mentioned they have an agreement with Cathedral City. What they do is they take a machine, they micro trench about 2 inches along your curb line, and they use that to install their fiber network and conduit and use that to connect to homes and businesses. What we have heard in reaching out to some cities that have done this, there's issues with their micro trenching system and how that gets finished and repaired and maintained long term. And we know that in talking to Sci-Fi, it's really an exclusive agreement that they're the only ones that can provide this fiber conduit throughout your city. Because they're relatively new, they're still a bit unknown about what they can provide.
Eric, do you want us to hold our questions till the end, or?
You're welcome to jump in. I'm hoping I can answer your questions by the time we finish this.
Just on that last point, I'm not understanding something. The Sci-Fi, are we talking about the same technology as fiber broadband the city is considering? Is it the same technology?
It's the same technology.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I mentioned we met with the city of Ontario. They have their own fiber network. They tie into part of the system that's out in Los Angeles. It's not their system is not widely available into the city. They primarily have made it a requirement of new development, and they have some larger clients like the Ontario International Airport and some of their warehousing. But they admitted to us, not all the residents and neighborhoods are connected, primarily their older neighborhoods, and many of the businesses haven't been interested in this type of service. They seem to be satisfied with the existing internet service that they have. So Ontario spent a lot of money implementing this program, and they have yet to see a return on their investment on what they've invested. For us, this is not something we would recommend doing. Our region is a bit smaller than Ontario and the Inland Empire, and if they're not making it work out there, there's a lot of risk for us trying to take on this type of approach here. And so that brings us back really to our master plan option. You know, Indio and Rancho Mirage have gone through this. We've heard from other cities that there's no interest really in service providers coming out here beyond Spectrum and the existing utilities. And we're hearing that we're not really a big enough market in the Coachella Valley to bring a big company in to build out this network for the city. But we did find that the Public Utilities Commission has that LATA grant. This would reimburse local agencies for going through that last mile kind of study, that master plan and feasibility study that we're looking at. It conducts a needs assessment. It provides the environmental clearance. It provides priorities for where we want to run and connect businesses and residences, and provides us that network design. And again, CVAG is also going through this grant application in hopes to complement and really provide more of a valley regional approach for it. Yes.
Yes, thank you, Eric. So my question is, and maybe I overlooked it, when you say like no interest from service providers, in terms of financial, how much would it cost the city to entice somebody like a Spectrum or a Frontier? Do we have a number? Or if you don't, you can let me know next week. It's nothing you have to answer right this moment.
Yeah, let's look into that. I'm not aware of a number, so.
Okay.
All right. So potentially with the master plan, what we're looking for is to partner with HR Green. This is an existing contract that the city has. They proposed this as part of their services in 2021. We're looking at amending that contract to call out the specific scope for this project and assign a budget. I mean, really what they're looking to do is conduct that feasibility analysis. What are the existing capabilities? What's the market demand? Host a number of community workshops and surveys and help us prioritize where to start connecting and running lines. The master plan would set the vision, would do a lot of the planning work, and it would even provide us cost estimates to build out this network. And lastly, really with broadband and the technology that's out there and the different approaches that other cities are doing, there's still a number of questions around it and what is the best approach for Palm Desert. What are the existing utilities doing? Where should the system go? We think the feasibility and market study are going to help us determine that. And then in terms of the other options, we're still working with CVAG. They're looking at that middle mile. They're looking at expanding possibly their program around broadband. And so we think the master plan will at least help the city of Palm Desert prioritize where that conduit and where that service should go. So that's kind of our presentation today. And then you'll hear it again during our open session.
Great. Okay, are there questions at this point? Okay, Mayor Pro Tem.
Just that previous slide when you were talking about the first contract with HR Green in 2021, how much was that contract for and what was their assignment?
Their contract when we originally entered into it was over $500,000, and it included supplementary staff services as well as potential to do a broadband master plan.
So was it a feasibility study to do the broadband?
Yeah, the broadband master planning. We didn't implement it then. We wanted to see how our contract with them would work out because they were a new contractor for us in 2021. They performed exceptionally well. They have an expert on their staff now that can really move this project forward for us. And looking at the council's goal and the intent, we think this really meets the intent for the council.
Okay, I have some questions, but it's probably appropriate to just hold those till the open session. So thank you.
Hey, Kathleen.
I want to feature one curiosity so that perhaps you can be prepared to answer this in open session. The diagram which showed the intended middle mile in green and then showed CVAG activity. My impression is that CVAG is installing fiber optic cable in connection with the second phase of their signal synchronization work. It would be helpful to see a diagram that features where that's happening, in addition to the proposed middle mile where we already have fiber optic cable going into the ground in connection with CV Sync. Does that make sense?
It does, and I believe we have that graphic.
We do.
Perfect.
Okay, I have a couple things. First of all, that micro trenching gives me bad flashbacks to President's Plaza. I can just see something a couple inches below the ground and all the problems that come from that. That to me sounds very unsure. And, we need to look at broadband and connectivity as we look at any other utility. And, great if the market can get involved. Sometimes government has to do things where the market may not feel it's advantageous to them. The CV Sync program, when we looked at it, and we started working on that about 8 years ago. We realized when we looked at the blueprint that it was the exact same blueprint that was needed for broadband. And so the dark fiber is dropped in there, and as you're going down 111 and other streets, you'll see the people out there dropping that down there now. I mean, it's ongoing. So that's in there. I want to mention too that CVAG is the only entity outside of Caltrans that got those funds for the middle mile. They're the only entity did, because CVAG's intent was to connect cities. And currently, because of what CVAG is doing, the region, the Coachella Valley, and this is why it's so important we work together, we have the nation's largest smart region project in the works right now. And that's through Advantech, who's doing a lot of this work. So we're ahead of the game, and we definitely have to piggyback on all of that and make sure that we are not redoing something, but building on what's being done with CVAG. Additionally, SCAG's couple year intent is to build broadband. So they have a lot of money for planning. And we should be looking at what is available through grants with SCAG. And I dropped some stuff off the other day about the program for the Affordable Connectivity Program. I have a whole slew of pages on it. But SCAG is doing a lot, because this is something we've got to build with everybody else. We can't do it in a vacuum. This is everybody. So we have this opportunity and we have to build on it. This is one of those things that COVID exposed to us, that everything is something we have to make sure. And if we're ever going to attract many of the businesses we talk about attracting, we've got to have high-speed fiber. We have to. And we have to make sure that our students, whatever their ages, are able to get education and telemedicine and telework and all those other things. So whatever we have to do to move this forward. And I'm happy as we move forward, and I know we're going to talk about this in public session later on. We should have the SCAG is deeply, deeply involved in this and will be a tremendous asset in this process. Those are my comments.
Mayor, just again, I appreciate your comments. I'm deferring mine to the open session. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to repeat mine, so you're going to have to hear them twice. Sorry. Yes, Councilmember Quintanilla.
I don't have as much of a question as I do a comment that I greatly appreciate, indicating where our higher education partners are located, so that we see where in proximity, and our responsibility to keep providing them with the ability and the connectivity to help them be successful.
And I want you to realize they have something that is a fiber connectivity throughout California. It's the scenic. So they've got the high speed. We just need, that's why we put the iHub across the street, because that's where the high speed fiber is. So
but not all of the students go to those locations. It's in the surrounding areas. For those that, for example, students that come from the Salton Sea area, where they don't have access to that, come to different parts of Palm Desert to use the services. So that's what I meant, knowing and acknowledging our student population.
Right. And again, all the schools have it. Now what we have to do is get it throughout the Coachella Valley, which is what CVAG's goal is. And to get it, as you saw in the schematic, down to the Salton Sea and beyond, we have to connect the entire valley. Are there any other questions, comments? Okay. Do we move on?
Madam Mayor and City Council, I'm pleased to introduce Grace Ramsey. She is co-director of Democracy Rising, and they serve as the city's technical advisor regarding ranked choice voting. Today, Grace will be leading the presentation, and of course, I'll be available for any questions.
Great. Thank you for the introduction, Anthony. It's nice to be joining you today. So my name is Grace Ramsey. I'm the co-director of an organization called Democracy Rising, and I've been leading voter education campaigns in places using ranked choice voting for 9 years now. So today I want to give you just kind of a rundown of the policy. I'm happy to answer questions that you have, and it's been a real pleasure working with Anthony and the other folks at your city developing voter education materials. So with that, I'm going to share my screen and dive in. It's a little hard to see, sorry. All right. All right, so broader picture, there's going to be a statewide election that you all are having on November 8th. And there will be a lot of races on this ballot, right? You will be electing members of Congress, statewide offices, your state legislature, as well as local elections. What we're going to focus on today are your local elections, because that is all that is changing on the ballot. So your congressional elections, statewide, state legislature, those will all be the exact same. The only thing that will be changing for voters in Palm Desert are those city council elections that will be on the ballot. So why are these elections changing? I think folks in this room are probably pretty up to speed, but we want to give that background as well. In 2019, a lawsuit under the California Voting Rights Act was settled. And as part of that settlement, 2 districts were created in Palm Desert. District 1, which elects 1 member of the city council, and District 2, which elects 4 members of the city council in staggered elections. So this November, Palm Desert voters in District 2 will be able to elect 2 members of the city council, and ranked choice voting was adopted in this process. So largely today, we're going to talk about what ranked choice voting is, how it works, and some frequently asked questions that we get, and I assume that there will be additional questions as well. So ranked choice voting for voters will focus on their perspective to start with, and then kind of work on how the votes are counted and how we determine our winners. But it's in the title. So you rank your choices to vote in a ranked choice voting election. We have a sample ballot here, and the way I advise voters to use their ballot is to work from left to right. So on that left side, we see the list of candidates. You go down that list, you determine which candidate is your favorite. We always say for the first choice, it's the candidate you love. So you find that candidate and you move slightly to the right and you fill in the oval in the first choice column. Voters can rank as many or as few candidates as they'd like. So if a voter just wants to rank a first choice and leave it there, that is within their right to do. But if they do want to rank additional candidates, those are backup choices. That's how I tend to view them. So let's say your favorite candidate is candidate B. And if for some reason they're no longer in the race, you still want to have a say in who's elected. That's where you'd go through that list of candidates on the left, find the candidate who maybe isn't your favorite, but you like just fine. And you would go over to the right to that second choice column and fill in that second choice oval for that candidate, and so on and so forth. So more broadly, your first choice is the candidate you like, second choice is first choice is the candidate you love, second choice is the candidate you like, third choice candidate you like slightly less, and so on. So that's the job of the voters, is to be able to rank that ballot and express their opinions amongst those candidates. Now it flips to the other side of how do we determine the number of votes a candidate needs to win? How do we determine our winners? So the goal of ranked choice voting in a multi-seat election, actually a single seat election as well, is to ensure that community groups have representation in proportion to their share of the vote, and then establishing a threshold that allows them to do that. So this is how it works in a ranked choice voting election. I'll go through how and why. So the winning threshold is the minimum number of votes you need to be elected. And it changes depending on the number of seats we're electing. So if we were electing 1 seat, like in District 1, a candidate would need more than 50% of the votes to be elected, because only 1 candidate can achieve that, right? So if 1 candidate earns more than half of the votes, if another candidate does, something has gone terribly wrong because we have more than 100% of the votes accounted for, right? So if a candidate has more than 50%, they can't be beaten. So they've earned that seat. With 2 seats, that threshold goes down a little bit because we're electing more than 1 person, and only 2 candidates can earn more than 1/3 of the vote, right? If 3 candidates earn more than 1/3, as we saw before, something has gone wrong and we have more than 100% of the votes accounted for. So in the District 2 elections, where we're electing 2 seats, the 2 winners will each need to earn more than 1/3 of the vote to be elected. So let's go through how the counting process would work. So the first is the job of the voters, right? Which is to rank those candidates in order of choice, as many or as few as they would like. And then establishing again, a candidate needs to earn more than a third of the votes, 33.3% plus one. It's a lot to say, so I just say more than a third to be elected. And we start by only looking at voters' first choices, just those first choices like any other election. If a candidate has enough votes to earn one of the seats, they win. If two candidates do, we don't have to go into the rest of that process. They will be elected and those backup choices will never factor in. But we have systems in place to make sure that we elect these two seats with as many voters as possible getting to weigh in on the decision. So as an example, if no candidate has enough votes to be elected, if no one has reached more than a third of the votes, no one has enough votes to earn one of the seats, we eliminate the candidate with the fewest votes, the candidate with the least amount of support. And because voters rank their ballots, when that candidate is eliminated, if you're a voter who ranked that candidate as your first choice, your vote would instantly go to the next choice on your ballot. And so if that elects one of the seats, wonderful, we have our winners. And that's how it'll work if no one has reached that threshold. We eliminate that candidate and we have those voters' choices go instantly to their next choice. Another thing that may happen is a candidate may really overperform and have maybe a vast majority of the votes, maybe a lot more votes than they need to be elected. And this is where the proportionality comes in. So if a candidate has more votes than they need to be elected, each of those voters who helped elect them will have a small portion of their vote count for their next choice. So let's say in this example, this candidate has 10% more votes than they need to be elected. Each of those voters would get a 10th of their vote to go to their next choice. Because we don't want to punish a large group of voters who share an opinion. We want the majority of seats to go to the majority, but we also want to ensure that the minority has representation as well. So you can see in this example, this candidate really performed strongly. Candidate A, those voters had a small proportion of their vote go to their next choice. If let's say that candidate had 10% more than they needed, each of those voters would have a 10th of their vote go to their next choice. And we see that put candidate B up to the threshold. So we continue this process where we eliminate the candidate with the fewest votes. And if a candidate has a surplus of votes, adjusting for that as well until we have our two winners. I see a hand up, so I'll stop there.
Yes, Gina Nastandi, I've had some of our constituents ask me about this particular slide. And
yes,
there's a bit of confusion where people think they have to rank everybody. If, for example, they don't want candidate 3 or if they don't want candidate A or D, they don't want that candidate, then they should not rank those two candidates, correct? Because they don't want their surplus votes going for those candidates. And I don't believe that is clear in our instructions.
Okay, we can definitely do more to make that clear. I try to always, whenever I'm having a conversation with a voter, whether it's a large group or one-on-one, make sure that voters know they can rank as many or as few as they want. If you don't like a candidate, do not rank them on your ballot. That is the advice.
So this slide is confusing. I've got a large group and their spokesperson has contacted me a few times this week.
Sure.
And they're confused. Because they don't want their votes. Yeah, because they don't want they think they have to rank everybody. And they were surprised to think that, like two candidates that they don't want could possibly get their vote. So what the message we need to get out is only vote for those you are comfortable with serving on city council.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So if we could make, is it too late to make that more clear when we go to vote?
Not at all. Well, I don't know if that's on ballot instructions. I haven't seen that in other places. A lot of that comes from, I'm trying to think if I can think of an example where there was a message similar to that. I don't think that I've seen that in official ballot instructions before, but I think we can certainly incorporate it significantly more in any anything going out to the public on the city's website, all of those things. We can really drive home that message.
Okay, thank you, Grace.
Of course, thank you. And I see another question.
Yes, thank you. We've just seen 2 slides that address what happens if A is the sole candidate to meet the threshold on the first round. Which of the, does this step that we're looking at right now come first?
Yes.
Before shifting D's votes? Because-
Yes. So if a candidate has a surplus, we handle that first. And then we assess how many seats we filled. And if we haven't filled the second seat, so we can see we have one seat elected here, A is elected. If that surplus is divided amongst the candidates based on the voters' rankings and no other candidate has reached that threshold, then we would do the process where we eliminate the candidate with the fewest votes.
Are there any additional slides?
We have a couple more. I have a couple addressing just frequently asked questions. If we don't have time, that's totally fine.
No, I was going to suggest, why don't we try and get through those?
All
Because
right,
it might prove helpful.
Okay. So I on these slides, it's what we hear most frequently and often what's easiest to answer in the community. So how many candidates should you vote for? How many should you rank? So you can rank as many or as few as you'd like. I think the main thing we always want voters to understand is that those second, third choices, those are backups. Your vote will do everything it can to elect your favorite candidate for as long as they're in the race. And then the second following up right behind that is, does ranking a backup choice hurt my favorite candidate? And the answer there is no. Those only factor in if your favorite candidate is either elected or eliminated. They really are backups. So we always want to make sure. I know a lot of times in our politics, it's you don't want to betray the candidate that you really like, but by ranking backup choices, it just ensures that you have a say in the event that they are not in the race anymore. Those are the two most frequent. If there are other questions, I'm happy to take them, but I do want to make sure people know that there is a website where we're uploading all of our educational materials. I'm so impressed with what the team has done, and I think it's a great resource. So with that, I'll stop sharing my screen and happy to take any additional questions you may have.
Okay, thank you so much. Are there any additional questions or comments? Councilmember Quintanilla, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Ms. Ramsey, I wanted to say thank you for putting together a very visually comprehensive way of explaining it. The way I've been telling folks is it's like sending somebody to get some ice cream, and you're able to say, well, I want this one, and if not that one, well, what about this? And then you gather everybody together to find out what's their favorite flavor. So I find that the way you've put it together in a chart is very helpful. And thank you for helping have residents increase their understanding in their voice.
Of course. I love examples like that. And I think if any of you are having conversations with voters, I can't recommend pulling it out of politics and putting it back in, because while this is new for a lot of folks, it's not a new thought process. And I think oftentimes when there is frustration with a change, it's often just not necessarily feeling confident in your ability to do it. And we make choices like this all the time. So I love hearing that example.
Except now before closed session, I need time to go get some ice cream.
As somebody who spent an entire summer canvassing at ice cream socials about ranked choice voting, I can tell you it becomes a problem after you sample the candidates too much.
Well, after the election, let me know what your favorite flavors of ice cream, and we made you the right choice, and I'll bring it in.
And I do want to comment that I went and watched Anthony give a presentation the other night, projectorless. He had anticipated being able to show the pictures, and he got there, and it was quite a surprise, and he did an excellent job. And it was, there were a couple who seemed overwhelmed, but primarily people were very receptive, and he did a great job of explaining. So I think we're going in the right direction. Now, if we can get to those other 51,000 people, we'll be fine. So, okay, any other questions? Okay, now this is where I need to ask if there are any public comment on closed session. Is that accurate, Anthony?
Correct.
And are there any?
I see none.
Okay, so we will all meet in closed session. It is 3:04. Does anybody need a couple minutes for a comfort break or anything? Did I see a hand up, Gina?
Kathleen asked for a few minutes.
Oh, okay.
Just a couple, just a
Okay.
couple.
So let's just, I have 3:04. Let's make it 3:09. We'll meet you back at the
Okay,
playground.
thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Be healthy.